Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of the Inspired Writer Collective podcast. Your hosts are both here today. I'm Elizabeth, and I'm here with Stephanie. And today I'm going to be kind of interviewing Stephanie because she has been working on this brand new aspect of our collective. So, as you well know, we have our podcast. I have my memoir course. Now, this is Stephanie's baby, and it is a data-driven author program. So, Stephanie, what is that? What does that mean?
Hello, listeners, and thank you, Elizabeth. It's so awesome to be able to talk about this today because this has been something that's been building over time, and I didn't always naturally gravitate towards thinking about data. But this particular program is really designed to help authors who feel intimidated, not certain what to look at about data, kind of scared to enter into the world of numbers because there's certainly that piece within the writing world of like, oh, I'm really good at words and books but numbers freak me out. And I'm here to tell you that first of all, data is not all about the numbers. There's so much more that you can do with your data or with just the idea of data as an author. And so this program is really meant to demystify what data is, how it can be used to benefit you in building your writing business. And so I'm super excited to be offering this to authors.
So cool. What is your background with data?
My background with data has sort of built over time, of course. Many of you who've been listening for a while know that I was a former classroom teacher, and there's a huge amount of data-driven decision-making that is essential to being a classroom teacher because you're constantly collecting data about the students, and especially with all of the emphasis on standardized testing and looking at, student scores, there are always those pieces that go into looking at, oh, well, these students scored this way in, language arts, and you can then break it down into the different subcategories of where their strengths are and weaknesses and use that for lesson designing. So that's kind of where it all started. And then during COVID, I had this crazy idea that I wanted to get another master's degree in data science and analytics. And so I went through the program at University of Missouri, and it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. I'm not going to lie that I definitely cried a lot during because there was definitely the piece where there was the coding and other languages in these programs where I was like, I just do not understand this. This is not natural to me. I was definitely in there with certainly a lot of guys who were like, it was really easy for them. And even the professors, in some cases, it was like, they just knew how to do it. And I was like, okay, literally break it down to me like I'm in kindergarten. And some of them just couldn't do it. And it was an interesting experience because it really made me push myself for one, but I also was like, well, how can I figure this out? And so that's where my focus on simplifying the data piece comes from, is really breaking everything down into simple steps, because I made it through the program and it was amazing. And I'm really glad that I did it. And it challenged me in ways that I had never been challenged before. And much like writing a novel now is a challenge because of all the steps you go through, I feel that in the same way that you break down aspects of your writing, it's important to break down aspects of data and not try to like figure it all out at once and take it, piece by piece. But that's my background. And then, of course, within the work that we do together, I, look at our data and, we talk about it and we say, okay, well, what is this telling us? Or what is this not telling us? Or, where can we get more information to inform our next decision for the direction we're taking the collective?
I've multiple ideas floating through my head. First of all, I can see how well you can relate to authors who feel overwhelmed about even the idea of looking at their data, because that's how you felt going through your master's program. It wasn't something that came easily to you. So it's like, it's like when you talk about finding someone to like coach you or guide you, you kind of want to pick the person who's struggled through it so that they understand the struggles versus the person who is telling you how to do what they did, but it came so naturally to them that they can't relate to maybe those roadblocks that you're facing. So I love that about your journey with looking at data and understanding data, because you're going to be able to relate to so many of us that struggle to even know where to start or get overwhelmed by the amount of data or all of those different things. The other aspect I want to highlight is I just sent you like a strengths test. It's called like the high five test yesterday. And I had to kind of giggle to myself when I saw your results this morning that you had sent back to me, that analytics was in the top 5 strengths. And I knew that, which is why I wanted you to take the strengths test, because I knew so much of your stuff was going to be about that. Because at least to me, as your business partner, I see you naturally gravitate towards, oh, let's look at this and see what's working. Let's see if this particular day makes a difference. Or you noticed really early on of, okay, we should put up our YouTube shorts on Tuesdays through Thursdays. The Mondays and Fridays, don't get much traction, and, let's not expend more of our energy or use more of our content if it's not going to really go the distance for us. So you're always looking at our email newsletter clicks, even the particular themes that we're talking about and how those resonate, which kind of leads into this next question, which you've already touched on a little bit of, what is data? Because I think a lot of people just assume it's numbers.
So data is really, in the simplest way, it's basically any information you use to help you make a decision. So even, something as simple as, looking at a recipe for something. That's data that's informing you as to how you're going to get to the end point of a meal you're going to fix. And so I think when you start thinking about it in terms of all the little pieces that are simple, it makes it less intimidating. Data can be, you have a theme going through your novel. For example, one of the pieces in my novel is going to be about the habitat of the lynx. Well, data for my novel is, well, what are all the things that I need? What are all the pieces of information that I need to collect to help me, build my character, build my world, to make it believable? And then, of course, when we're looking at numbers, data, you can break it down to, your likes, your subscribers, your, how many clicks a newsletter link is getting, how many views a YouTube video is getting. There's so many different ways that you can come to data, and it really comes down to what is the information that you are most curious about. What are your questions? What are you most curious about? Are you curious about, well, what themes in my newsletter are resonating with my subscribers? Or are you most curious about how many people are viewing a YouTube video you put up? So a lot of it is just having a question that you want answers to, and how are you going to get the answers?
Yeah, for sure. And, we're talking about a lot about data in regards to sort of how you market or get, maybe subscribers or views or readership potentially, as you publish and everything. But I can see us even using data to even understand our writing routines and optimizing our writing routines, in the sense of, okay, when I sit down in the morning, I have trouble focusing, and maybe if I use Adrienne's yoga freebies in order to do some stretching beforehand, then I find that I work better. Or maybe I find that my word count, which is a number metric, is higher when I sit down and do my writing in the afternoon. And so I can see ways in which authors would want to look at themselves sort of as the data source in order to really make the most of even their writing efforts. Are there
Yeah,
other
and
aspects too?
well, first, I want to build on that example that you just shared, because I think that that's such a great example of just looking at your own actions and what you're doing as a writer. And it just makes me think about how, when there's a fitness instructor in a gym I go to, and she's always talking about how she's always, making note of her routine and what she's done, and that she's kept journals since like 70 or something. And so, just even that is data for her. And it's the same thing. It made me just think about with what your example with writers is, how keeping track of those little pieces of information, especially, say for a 30-day period, because if you just do it for a week, it's going to inform a little bit, but really like over a month's time is much better chunk of information. And then even if you go longer, 6 months, a year, and build it out, you get even more information, because of course life happens and such. But I think those types of metrics are also great. In terms of other ways for data, you can use it for, I was just having a conversation recently with someone about spreadsheeting your novel, that you can look at the theme, you can take, okay, so which themes do you have running through your novel? And you can put your different beats into a spreadsheet and then color code them and make sure that you're hitting your themes. If you have a love interest, or there's some, where's the point of tension, maybe a corporate takeover like I'm addressing in my novel. You make sure that you're touching upon those through all the beats of your novel. That's another way that you can create a data set for yourself and say like, oh, I'm not hitting it there. And then you and I also just recently went through a course called Path with Amanda McKinney, who's going to be a future guest on our podcast here. And I think some of her strategies too, about how to break down, say, a 90-day goal for yourself when you sit down to plan and think, okay, within this time, what is realistic for me to accomplish? 90 days sounds like a lot, but her course is amazing for making you frame it like, okay, wait a minute. I'm probably not going to be writing for 90 days straight, because let's be honest, like, it's a lofty goal, and we love to say that we're going to write for 90 days straight, but let's be real. Like, life happens. We have other things that are responsibilities. And even as a writer, we need breaks sometimes to sit back and step back from what we're working on. So then it breaks it down even more. And then, so then that's another piece of data for you have for yourself, is like, okay, what is the reality of how many hours I have during this time? And if I have, like, when I did mine, it came down to like, okay, you have 96 hours. It's like, okay, within those 96 hours, what can I realistically accomplish? Or if you have fewer hours, what can you realistically accomplish? And I think those are also data points to look at too. And listener, we just want to let you know, I'm just going to throw this in here, that we do have an affiliate link with Amanda's course, and it's available for you for a discount. So that will be in the show notes as well. And it's another great piece, especially related to, building data sets for yourself and approaching data in a different way.
Yeah, and we'll devote a whole episode to that next week. So if you want to know more about goal setting and how Stephanie and I are, what we've set for our 90-day milestones, how we've used that course in order to really create a distinct, concrete plan that feels realistic and achievable, we're going to go into so much more detail about that next week. One of the things that you've started to do, Stephanie, within our email newsletter, the weekly newsletter that comes out when you subscribe to the Inspired Writer Collective, is that you've included a section of this data-driven author piece. And each week you are giving our subscribers a little snippet of something tangible that they can do, or a different way of thinking about data. Just to highlight a couple of the things that you've already shared within the month of January, which is how long we've been adding this to the newsletter, is that data is not just numbers. You talk about the fact of like not allowing yourself to get overwhelmed with data by either looking at it too frequently or looking at too small of a subset, which you just referenced. Like you said, like, oh, you could look at a week, but that may not give you as great of a picture as looking at, a month or several months. Also, you've provided in a previous newsletter, what kind of things could you check monthly and figuring out what makes sense of when to check what metric. And a lot of that can be based off of, say, for me, on my author website, I just released my first monthly newsletter. And sure, that first monthly newsletter could give me some insights, but since I'm only doing it monthly, I can't really extrapolate great data from it until I have a couple of months. Whereas we put out the Inspired Writer Collective newsletter every week. So after a month, we have 4 to 5 weeks worth of data that we can look at and see if we're getting a better open rate, what our click rate is looking like, and all of that.
Yeah, well, there's definitely the newsletter is a fabulous resource, and we highly encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter so you don't miss the weekly and tip for the data-driven author. And it's a small, tangible, quick piece. I'm not going deep into detail. I'm just providing, a quick insight into an aspect of what it looks like to be a data-driven author and how it can help you with your decision-making. And one of the pieces I want to highlight is just how much confidence looking at your data can give you as an author, and looking at how people are engaging with you, and you can feel more confident the more that you do it. And it is one of those pieces of you need to be in it for the long game. We look at with the Inspired Writer Collective with our podcast, we're at episode 57 now. And so over the time from when we started with episode 1 to now, we have a huge amount of data that we can look at in terms of the engagement. And one of the coolest things is when you go into the back end of some of these programs is they allow you to break down the data into smaller chunks. And those analytical pieces can feel intimidating to navigate. And that's one of the pieces that I want to help support authors with is, where do you go to look at this? And when you go there, what are you looking at? And what can that tell you? For example, if you go into the back end of our podcast, you can see that there's a steady increase over time of engagement. And it just keeps going up and up and up, and it's steady. And we're not here to, our vision at the start was not like, oh yeah, we're going to throw a podcast out there and it's going to be an overnight, we're just going to go skyrocketing, to the, but the fact that we have a steady increase tells us like, okay, something here is working. And we see that, and we see that with the engagement. And again, just having the confidence of writing your, titles for, writing the titles and just little bits and really being, if you're intimidated by it, one of my goals is to help break down that wall for you and allow you to have a little bit more of a sense that like, yeah, I can understand this, because the more you understand it, the more that you're going to be able to engage with your readers and know what your readers want, because at the end of the day, that's important. I mean, you might have your group of writer friends who have their opinion, but really your writer friends are probably not going to be your readers.
Right.
And there's just a lot that that you can do to inform yourself. And that's why I started this piece, and also why I offer it every week in our newsletter, is because starting small, starting with little bits is really the best way to go, because reducing overwhelm is important. We want to simplify. That's really one of my, visions behind this, is keeping it simple, because even for me, sometimes it can feel overwhelming. And so that's when I step back and say, okay, what is the question that I'm trying to answer? What do I want to know? where am I going to find that answer? And when you break it down into manageable steps in that way of simple questions, it can make it less scary.
I want to highlight, too, something that one of our previous guests said. Michael Fedor, he talks a lot about how he looked at his engagement in his social media presence and how well that was converting to his email list subscribers, and saw that it was, a small single digits number or percentage of even subscribers, and then actually converting that to readers who either download his freebie prequel or who opt into purchasing one of his books was so minimal. And then when he looked at how the level of subscribership and then percentage of conversion to actual readership of the emails that he would get when he was doing like the book swap things that he talks about on that episode, it was so much higher. And that's how he knew where to focus his energy, to not allow himself to get drained by the whole concept of you need to be posting regularly on social media. People need to know who you are. That he was able to figure out what avenue was helping him find his actual readers. And I think you did a good job of highlighting, that difference, that sometimes even engagement on social media, you can look at that data and say, oh, I'm getting great engagement. But I mean, is that converting to people joining your email list? Because as we've recently seen with the TikTok ban, and then of course it came back, but it's a great reminder that we don't own those spaces, and those are transient. The algorithms are always shifting. They can go away. So the real question is, are you attracting readers? How are you getting readers? Are people clicking on your links and purchasing? I've got a podcast guest episode coming up with a romance author who was originally writing and self-publishing on Amazon back in, I think it was 2006. And so the algorithm there was different then. The market wasn't as saturated. She could post a link on her Facebook group and she could sell, 10,000 copies just from that link that she would post. But now, as she is re-entering that space again, she's seen how much both of those algorithms and markets have changed, such that when she would post a more recent book that she had published on her Facebook group, most people aren't seeing it. The clicks are so much lower. All of that is really helpful data. Mm-hmm. And these are just two examples of successful published authors who are looking at their data. But I do, as you were talking about, you come from a place of curiosity with these questions. And for me, I think I get more of this sense of what questions do I need to be asking? Because I don't know necessarily what questions I have. What should I be asking? What kinds of information do I need to know? And I think a lot of people are so intimidated, especially with marketing in general, that they don't even know what questions to ask. So do you have some sense of some of the entry-level questions that authors should be asking and looking into their data for?
Well, I definitely think that just saying, especially if you have an email list, which I think is a really important place foundationally for all authors to start. I think everyone should have an email list of some type that you're trying to build, because you own your email list. It's yours. You're not building on rented land, if you're on any of the social media platforms. So foundationally, I think starting there is really important. And I think when you're looking at that, simple places to start would be asking yourself, what topics am I writing about that readers are engaging with? And you can look at, how many people opened it. Did you have any links in there? Did anybody click on any of the links? And it's not a requirement to have links in every single, email. Certainly it can be beneficial, especially to always have, a link to your website, and links to your, if you do decide that you want to be on social media. I do want to highlight that I don't think it's a requirement to be on social media to be a successful author. I think it really comes down to your own individual approach. and what works for you and what makes you feel the most comfortable. And then from there, again, just, who is engaging with me? And sometimes you can answer those questions from looking behind the scenes. Sometimes the analytics don't always give you those answers, depends on the level of engagement. But you can usually get some information in terms of geography of where people are tuning in from, and that can inform a little bit. Uh, I think if you're not sure, there that's where I encourage you to reach out and ask the question and say, I'm wondering about, how I look at the data on Instagram. And maybe it's a question of how do I look at it? Where do I go to look at my data? How do I, spreadsheet my novel if that's a curiosity from this, and it's going into Google Sheets and oh my goodness, that opens and it feels so intimidating, and so eventually I'm going to have a template available down the road that can be accessible to authors. And so that's going to be the other piece, is that through our newsletter these pieces will be available. So that's why, we really encourage you to get on our email list so you don't miss out on, our offerings of, checklists for you to help you, and, different ways that you can connect with us across the different aspects of our collective, between the data, Elizabeth's memoir course, the podcast. There's so many pieces that we're building here for you, listener, to support you in your writing and author journey.
Well, Stephanie, I'm so glad that you're putting this together, that you're providing these like small little snippets so it doesn't get overwhelming. You've clearly done sort of the background work as far as the understanding of the data, or the what kinds of questions to ask, so that you can simplify it and spare the rest of us the tears that you had to endure. And so I think this is just going to be a phenomenal, additional piece of value that the collective is providing. Not only do we expose our listeners to phenomenal guests that have their own specialties, their own knowledge, but then this is a way for us to help our listeners and readers of our email list extract the value from themselves, because each one of you has value. And by looking at this data, you're going to be able to see where your strengths are, where you need to, maybe shore up some things or find some other tools to help you and assist you in those areas where you feel less confident or where there could be rooms for improvement. So I think that we're putting so much value out there, Stephanie, and I think this is a piece of the puzzle that just fits together so nicely with our collective offerings. So thank you for doing this. Is there anything I've not asked you that you want to be sure that we share?
I think we've covered, every little bit. I'm sure there's probably something I'll think of after the fact. That always seems to happen. But I think, again, it's just, I really want to, be a support and break it down and make it simple for you, listener, so that you can really focus on what matters most to you, which is your writing. But of course, we know in this world that we're in, it's important to be informed. And whether you're a traditionally published author or you're self-publishing, it really doesn't matter these days in terms of what you need to be aware of in terms of your data and where your best engagement is and where your readers are. There's a lot that you have to do yourself. And so I really hope you'll reach out with questions. Definitely please join our email list. There's a link in the show notes. And so, yeah, just don't be afraid of data. Data is not that scary.
Yeah, it's meant to be a tool. It's meant to be an aid. It's helpful. And why would you waste time doing something? Our time is so precious as writers. So it's so helpful to figure out what is not getting you the results that you need so you can stop doing some things. It's not always about putting more on the to-do list. Sometimes it's about streamlining. Certainly, you've emphasized the word simplifying. So thank you, Stephanie, for that. Thank you, listener, for supporting our podcast. Thank you for subscribing to our YouTube channel or to our podcast. Thank you for all of those 5-star reviews. You guys mean so much to us, and we're really just trying to find ways to provide as much value as we can to you. That's what this data-driven author piece is all about. So thank you for subscribing to the newsletter and engaging with us here, and happy writing.